Slander. What a vile lie. She threw the paper away and reached for the telephone. She must call her husband and warn him. The lines jumped in front of her eyes. Something squeezed her lower abdomen, and her lower back split in two with pain. A thought flashed through my mind. Too soon. It was still 2 months away from delivery. Jane Seberg was preparing to become a mother for the second time. She already had an 8-year-old son, Alexander. Jean was 31 years old, and no one would have given her those years. Rather, she looked like a student with her fragile figure, disheveled blonde hair, and eternal haircut pixie. In August 1970, the actress Jean read in the newspaper about herself Nasty Los Angeles Times, published by the columnist Joyce Haber, which indicated that the famous actress Seberg is expecting a second child is not from her husband, writer and diplomat Romain Gary, and from the dark-skinned leader of the party, Black Panthers, fighting against racial injustice. The bullying has begun. On August 23, Jean prematurely gave birth to a tiny baby girl who weighed 1.8 kilograms. The baby girl was immediately carried away from her mother. Doctors fought for the life of the newborn Nina for 2 days. On August 25, the baby died and Jean was never able to become a mother again. The funeral was like a fog, but Jane Seberg gave a clear order. Her daughter was buried in an open casket so that journalists were convinced the skin of the child is white. From that moment on, everything in Jane's life would go wrong. The couple could not return to the old life. With Romain Gary, who recognized the child and named the girl after his mother, Nina Olchinskaya, they will part. Behind the persecution of the actress was the great and terrible Edward Hoover himself, who headed the FBI. If Jen knew how expensive it would cost her passion for the ideas of equality and fraternity. No one was subjected to such a dirty and relentless harassment as Jane Seberg with wiretapping, checking the status of her bank accounts, surveillance, psychological influence, and rude interference in the movie career. Jen owes her good looks to the Scandinavian genes of her father, Edward Waldemar Seberg, a descendant of Swedish immigrants. Jean Dorothy Seberg was born in 1938 in the state of Iowa in the family of a teacher and a pharmacist. The girl seemed white, cute little quiet girl with chubby cheeks, not capable of rebellion and resistance. However, she nurtured her stubborn dreams and plans to become an actress. Even in her childhood years, Jean began to write poetry and perform in plays. After graduating from high school, Jane Seberg entered the University of Iowa at the Faculty of Dramatic Art and almost immediately was selected by director Otto Preminger of 18,000 applicants for the main role of Joan of Arc in the movie Street Joan. Such a large-scale search was comparable only to the casting for the movie Gone with the Wind. The actress was looking for the entire country. This young Jean seemed to young Jane extraordinary luck and a wonderful dream. On the set, Seberg rode a horse, wearing 14 kilograms of armor, and in the scene of climbing on the fire, inadvertently pyrotechnics received burns, forever left on the body scars. But the game of the young debutante was coolly evaluated by critics. Nevertheless, the beauty of Jean impressed the audience and Otto decided to take a chance again. He gave the girl the role of Cecile in the movie Hello, Sadness, in the book by Francois Sagan. The movie was filmed in Street-Trapez and the young actress was in no hurry to return home after the work, especially since she was waiting for a real triumph. Jean-Luc Godard took Jean for the main role of Belmondo's girlfriend in the movie In the Last Breath. The girl immediately felt crazy popularity, and she became the one whose hair and style began to copy fashionistas from around the world. The young beauty introduced into fashion trapeze dresses, white ballet flats, trench coat, and calfskin Britain, and all the outfits were her own. Low-budget movie did not provide neither makeup artist nor costume designer, and Jean independently selected clothes. In France, Seberg met with a young lawyer François Maury and September 5, 1958 married him. Jean recalled that when they met, Maury invited her to an expensive restaurant, ordered a gourmet dinner, tasted wine, and demanded that the sommelier to bring another bottle, because the wine, in his opinion, gave the cork. With his aristocratic manners, François made a huge impression on the young American, accustomed to burgers, steaks, and jeans. But the marriage with François did not go well. The spouses were too different. What Jean took for love turned out to be a crush. Francois seemed to be a typical playboy and a very oppressive husband. Jean had no friends in Paris, and relations with Francois began to deteriorate. Her husband disappeared at social parties, had affairs with girls, friends with Roger Vadim, and suddenly also wanted to become a director. In 1961, Jean and Francois met at a reception with the French consul Romain Gary and his wife, a successful writer Leslie Blanche. Gary was 24 years older than Jean, and she almost immediately fell under his spell. Masculine, tanned, witty, winner of the prestigious Prix Goncourt for his novel The Roots of the Sky. In the past, a military pilot and a hero of World War II, assured that his real father was a silent film actor Ivan Mazhukin. In short, Jean fell in love and definitely wanted to become Madame Gary. By the time of acquaintance, Gary had already achieved a lot. International recognition, solid literary royalties, he was surrounded by interesting people, he had a long-term stable marriage, but at the same time he enjoyed great success with women. His wife Leslie Blanche was his reliable rear and assistant. He seemed to have achieved everything one could wish for, but this is on the surface and in the depths. After the death of his beloved mother, and his soul formed a huge void. Romain constantly talked to his mother in his thoughts. Marriage with Leslie was childless. The wife was a strong-willed, determined, and independent woman. Gary was desperate for care and tenderness, and wanted to care for and love someone himself. In his interviews, Gary supported rumors about himself as a Don Juan, because during the diplomatic service for him, the nickname sex attaché, he repeatedly said that he adored all women in the world and was interested in all of them as a writer. But in reality, he dreamed of finding one single and unique woman, his woman. Gary was touched by the fragile vulnerability and completely childlike face of Jean. He saw her as the heroine of his novel, which stirred his imagination, and he never gave up on his heroes until he revealed all their secrets. Jean was also an actress like his mother. The fact that Leslie, 53, and Romain, 46, had not lived as spouses for a long time, and Seberg's marriage was coming to its logical conclusion. Between Jean and Gary began a passionate romance, but to marry Seberg, Romain was not yet going to. Having learned from acquaintances about the passion of her husband, Leslie Blanche revenged Romain. She went on vacation in Turkey for 2 weeks, spending a fabulous amount of money on her whims, and significantly emptied the pockets of Romain. Gary suddenly felt like a toy for which two women were fighting, and neither wanted to give in. The first did not want to give him a divorce, and the second wanted to marry him at any cost, and even attempted to open his veins in the bathroom, scaring him to death. The battle was won by youth. Jean became pregnant. Divorce from Leslie cost dearly Romain: an apartment worth 21 million francs on Avenue Mozart, a house in Roqueroom, a lump sum allowance of 75 million francs, and monthly maintenance of 500,000 smoothly flowed into the hands of the former Madame Gary. She made do with fewer losses. In 1960, Seberg appeared, as requested by her husband, in the movie Change, the writer and co-director of which he acted. After that, the spouses dissolved their marriage. Romain made the decision to retire and settled down with Jean. July 17, 1962, the couple had a son, Alexander, who, with the light hand of a Spanish nanny, all began to call Diego. October 6, 1962, took place a modest wedding, Gary and Seberg. Surrounding people saw in the union of a dazzlingly beautiful movie star and a famous writer magical fairy tale. At the time, Jane Seberg was at the zenith of her fame. After the film Lilith, she was finally recognized as a serious actress. She received new contracts and traveled around the world. In love with her husband, obediently followed her everywhere, at first enjoying traveling and causing a lot of trouble with his jealousy of his young wife. The more they traveled to third world countries, the more Jean was strengthened in the idea of the first call to stand up for the underprivileged. The couple stayed in luxurious hotels and comfortable villas, dined in expensive restaurants, but around them there were shanty towns and poverty. Impulsive and gullible Jean became an ardent supporter of the organization Black Panthers, speaking in their defense with fiery speeches and generously donating to fight their fees and money that she gave Gary, endlessly indulging his wife. But soon revolutionary escapades' young wife began to irritate and tire aging Romain Gary. Jean also tried to get into the role of the ideal wife of the famous writer, but the role of a society lady, which is so easily performed by Leslie Blanche, began to drag Jean. Gary treated her as a little girl, which all had to be taught. At receptions with diplomats and celebrities, Jean was afraid to open her mouth, afraid to say something wrong and catch the angry look of the husband. Jean began to drink a lot and more than once ended up in clinics. She showed signs of depression and took medication. Romain tried to fight for her, put his wife in the best clinics, but Seberg snapped again and again. She claimed she was being stalked, and she wasn't wrong, but she continued to fund all sorts of dark personalities who blatantly extorted money from her. She was indeed being followed by the FBI and was patiently waiting to move into action. The goal of the American intelligence services was to neutralize Seberg. To do so, the plan was to embarrass her and damage her image in the public eye, while taking precautions to avoid identification by FBI agents. Journalist Joyce Haber was planted with information about Jean's connection to the African-American leader of the Black Panthers, which she wrote about in her anonymous memo. Jane Seberg's reputation as a woman and as an actress was destroyed, despite the fact that Gary officially recognized Nina as his child and called a press conference for journalists. With Romain Gary, they did divorce, although he continued to support Jean and care for his son throughout his life. Clouds were gathering over Jean. Seberg was blacklisted from Hollywood actors. The only roles she was offered, Jean claimed, bordered on pornography. No one seemed to want Jean. Her son spent more time with his nanny than with his parents. She hadn't been much of a nanny before, in the middle of her career. Gary bought Jen an apartment in the building where he lived with his son so that she could see the boy more often. In an attempt to be loved again, Seberg married director Dennis Barry. The marriage lasted 4 years. Jean never recovered from the blows of fate. She made several attempts to leave the life, and almost all of these attempts occurred on August 25, the anniversary of Nina's death. Toward the end of her life, Seberg began dating a young Algerian playboy, Ahmed Hashi, who extorted money from her and abused her. On the morning of August 30, 1979, Jane Seberg disappeared. The day before, she and her boyfriend attended the premiere of the movie The Light of a Woman, scripted by Romain Gary with Yves Montand and Romy Schneider. In it, Romy played one of her last roles and was nominated for a César Award. On Saturday, September 8, 1979, around 7 p.m. in his own car, white Renault, was found the body of 40-year-old film actress Jane Seberg, wrapped in a blanket. In the car lay a suicide note addressed to her son. Death was considered a suicide. In the blood of Jean was found a high concentration of alcohol and sedatives. The case was closed, despite the inconsistencies. The amount of alcohol in Jean's system was so high that she should have been in a coma and unlikely to have been able to get into the car on her own without help, and no empty alcohol bottles were found in the car. Police speculated that someone was present at the time of Seberg's death and deliberately left her in that condition without seeking medical attention. A year later, on December 2, 1980, in Paris, Romain Gary committed suicide. He left a note saying that his death had nothing to do with Jane Seberg's suicide and that he was simply exhausted as a writer. Nothing to do with Jane Seberg. Heartbreak cult zealots to be addressed elsewhere. P.S. Alexander Diego Gary was left alone at the age of 18. About his parents, he wrote a poignant book, Hope for Life, where he suggested that Romain Gary waited until his ex-wife's numerous suicide attempts finally succeeded in order to quietly leave himself and not leave his son in the care of a mentally unstable mother. Friends, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. See you in new exciting videos.